Austin Zaccor is lead data scientist at EVgo, an MIT master's graduate in business analytics, and a data whiz with a sharp wit. Austin wanted to bring his data crunching superpowers somewhere trying to do good by the earth. So he left the insurance tech industry. He went to EVgo. Speaking of, EVgo is trying to solve a very real problem, aren't they, Ty?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest questions people have about electric vehicles is the range. How far am I going to get? Is there going to be a charger there? How long will it take? All of these things. Well, this is a huge data problem. And with data scientists' mind, like Austin has, looking at this, I think it's a really fun conversation to explore. And I think we talk a little bit about, do you actually need to worry about that in America today? So find out, stick with us, and listen to the episode. What else should people be excited about in today's episode?
Lots of things, Ty. For example, did you know charging stations to build one is a very involved process? These companies have to hit it within budget. They build hundreds of these and they got to do it really fast. Or that there are a few different charging plugs to charge your EV. So today, each car maker, think of GM, Ford, uses a different charging plug. So you as an EV owner have to carry these adapters if you're on a road trip and you're driving with your EV. Kind of a pain in the ass, you know?
Yeah, huge problem. So join the conversation with us and Austin Zaccor today, and Mayhem on.
Mayhem on. Austin, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. You're the second guest we've had in the EV industry. You come from a unique angle because it's around a network of chargers that's like not home chargers. So I think this would be a really fun conversation. I thought we'd start off with something around, is it called standard query language? Is that right?
Structured query language.
Structured
Yeah,
query
very
language.
close,
Okay. So structured query language, SQL, SQL is the shorthand for it. Why should everyone learn SQL?
Yeah, I think SQL is a phenomenal language for a lot of reasons. The first being it's very accessible, right? Like it's very easy to learn as a first language. People who aren't familiar with coding, I think, cold feet at the thought of working on something like that. But SQL has like maybe 24 keywords that you need to remember, and really only like 10, and then you're basically fluent in the language, and it's just understanding your company's data if you want to be able to access and query and manipulate your organization's data in a very effective way. Like as a data scientist, even, and especially as a data analyst, like 90% of what you do can probably be done in SQL. So I think people would
Nice.
be surprised to find how self-sufficient they can become if they just spent like 3 hours self-studying SQL online for free and then applying it to what data probably already exists at their company.
Yeah, I I second a lot of those things. I work at a company that they pride themselves on being technologists. Everyone's pretty technical. It's a SaaS, but the amount of people that know SQL is pretty low. But for when people do know it, it's like everyone is pretty impressed with them. Like it's like their credibility, their street cred at the company goes like 2 or 3x. And well, on one hand, I think it's silly. On the other hand, I'm like, it makes sense because then you understand the underlying. It's almost like you understand the subway system, right? Like how underneath the entire city, how it's all connected, and how you can actually get from that corner of the city to that corner of the city, right?
Totally. Yeah, it really unlocks a lot of doors. And the barrier to entry, especially if you already know something like
Yeah.
Excel, like you're used to working with tables, the barrier to entry is so low.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's one thing you do have to call out. It's never done. What is it querying? Tell real quick, just so that we have a little better picture of the subway and where it's going from.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the whole point of SQL is that it's a language developed to talk to databases. So, if you have, your company has quote unquote a warehouse, it's a very frequently used term. You have a warehouse or a data lake house or something like that. You have a place where data tables are stored together. You have a big group of tables together. A query is just a way of you providing instructions to your data warehouse that you want certain things in a certain way, and then you get that data back.
Perfect. Great. That's super helpful.
Then LJ, because a lot of people know,
Every tech company has data warehouses.
Right. And a lot of people know VLOOKUP, the function of VLOOKUP in Excel. And so when someone's like, why should I learn SQL? I say, well, you know how you do VLOOKUP and you have like 3 different spreadsheets that you're trying to connect in tabs? I'm like, you could just do that all in like an instance. And they're like, oh, I get it. I'm like, yeah, you can work a lot faster. It really is effectiveness over efficiency, right?
Yeah, but it's also efficiency, right? Because like
Mm.
Excel is limited to just over a million rows, whereas SQL, a million rows is trivial for most data
Oh,
warehouses. Like
really? Okay.
you could instantly join like hundreds of times that easily, and then that would essentially be your like VLOOKUP. And also like not all data is available in that Excel format, right? Because that implies that somebody has already downloaded it and now it's static. Whereas uh, whatever the most recent, most accurate, most up to date data is. So yeah, it is an efficiency. It is a like effectiveness as well. I think it's both. I just think SQL's a great language.
Nice.
And how is it different than Python? If someone asked, like, if someone was a total rookie in this.
Yeah, that's a good question too, because both, especially today, both are very popular for like data analysis, right? But Python is a full, like proper programming language. SQL's not a programming language. Like you couldn't
Okay.
write an app in SQL, right? But Python is what you would call an OOP, an object-oriented programming language,
Mm-hmm.
where most maybe it's getting a bit in the weeds, but like most things are a class and classes have attributes, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what I said originally about it is for programming rather than just querying is the main distinction.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, because when you're querying, you could think of, you're looking at a table, you're going down a row, you're going down a column, you're getting an answer, but you're getting some data in a more filtered way. So that makes sense. Oh, Austin, what got you interested in climate sustainability space? I feel like it's something that has been your interest for longer than just the past year or two. Is that right?
Definitely. Yeah. So I wondered if I wanted to go into environmental economics when I was an undergrad, but for some reason it was just a less rigorous version of the economics major, which didn't really appeal to me. So I stuck with
Uh,
economics and just took some environmental science classes. I actually met my, it was a good
nice.
call.
Nice.
But yeah, I have always been, I don't know what, started the interest. I grew up kind of in the woods, so I spent a lot of time outdoors. So maybe that kind of fostered a love of the natural world. But I've always been sort of environmentally inclined. And then I didn't really get to live that in my day to day, certainly not my occupation until I started at EVgo. And it's not for a lack of looking, it was
Mm-hmm.
really just what was and wasn't available to me at the time. Um, but yeah, in grad school, I got to work on some cool research projects on environmental science that maybe we can talk about at the end if we have time. But EVgo is
Sweet.
really my first full time job working in the sustainability industry.
And you said you spent a lot of time in the woods. What, down in California? You grew up in Berkeley, San Francisco. Is that right?
So I grew up in Tahoe, actually,
Okay.
up in
Nice.
the mountains, and my house like backed up to like National Forest Service land. So if I just
Wow.
walked west from my backyard, I don't think I would hit another road until I reached like the outskirts of Sacramento. Like it was that much wilderness. It was awesome.
Damn. Damn. Okay.
Wow. Cool.
And were your parents nature lovers too?
My dad he was actually one of the like original like big wall climbers in Yosemite Valley in the 1980s.
Wow.
No way.
Yeah. So he has a couple routes that
Hmm.
he has like first ascents on that
Really?
yeah, pretty cool legacy. I got into climbing, but I
Nice.
was never as good as he was.
That's awesome.
That have you seen Don Wall
I
back
have,
in the,
yeah.
that story's pretty. Tommy Caldwell's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
His whole life is pretty nuts.
It is, yeah.
Kind of like out of a, I don't know, fiction novel. Ty, have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
So I don't want to ruin too many parts of it, but there's two. I'll tell you one of the two things that happen in it that are just absolutely crazy. So one is Oh, this is probably the most interesting one. So Tommy became this rock climbing prodigy at like 16 or 17 years old, and then very quickly he met this girl who he ended up falling in love with, and they got married, who also was a climbing prodigy. So they're both like 17, 18 years old, and he starts climbing around the world. And one of the places he goes climbing is, I think it was Afghanistan or Pakistan. And while they're out there happened to be some sort of guerrilla warfare going on, like with local terrorists. And the place that they were at in this remote mountainous country, them getting kidnapped, like becoming
Oh
hostages to
goodness.
these terrorists. And then they're walking through through these trails trying to, like, everyone gets lost, I guess, like the terrorist group gets lost, they don't know how to get back, so they split up. And the single I just keep calling the single terrorist, the single guy that they're following, he has a gun, but it's just them two and him. And remember, he's 18 years old, so they're walking along the ridge of this cliff, and of course they're really skilled at climbing on something that could be potentially dangerous. And he looks at his girlfriend, and he's like, I think this is our moment to get out of this. And he, like,
Mm,
she reads from his eyes that he's going to push him off the side of the cliff. And he gets this confirmation from her that she's like, yeah, you have my blessing, I won't like hate you for doing this. And then he just turns around and like just pushes him, and the guy like tumbles, gone, like he's dead.
wow.
And they escaped, like they survived because that happened. It was insane.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, that's a wild story.
Wild story. Yeah. And then the other story is that Tommy loses one of his fingers, like in the middle of his climbing career, and he adapts his climbing style to use his a different finger to still become like the strongest climber ever. It's
Wow.
phenomenal. It's like a Rocky story. Very cool. All right. Anyway, that tangent aside, Austin, so you've been thinking about sustainability, climate space for a while. You appreciate nature. When did you start thinking about the issues around the climate, like especially from a data science perspective? Did you see any things based on like things you saw in data or research you had done that allowed you to care or see things before maybe others did?
That's a good question. So EVgo is not the first like data science role in the climate space that I applied to. That is the first one that I thought was a good match. Um, I don't know how far I want to go down this road, but I applied for this role that I thought was really interesting. This was my first like exposure to like, wow, like I could really use data science to make a difference in climate.
Hmm.
And that was at a company called Climate Corp, which is a subsidiary of Bayer Monsanto.
Hmm.
And I was really interested in that job because I thought it would be like really using data science to sort of reduce agricultural waste and increase
Mm,
efficiency. And agriculture, like food development, is such a huge contributor to emissions.
Hmm.
mm-hmm.
Like obviously you have the whole thing like meat versus vegetables, but even just like the way vegetables or cereal crops are grown is a huge contributor because like all fertilizers come from petrochemicals, and all
Mm-hmm.
insecticides are basically
Hmm.
derived from petrochemicals, and then all the tractors run on petrochemicals, you have to ship them, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
like you really want to be efficient, but I just didn't get the vibe that this role was really going to be contributing positively. And you got to kind of make your own sort of moral judgment calls when you are getting in bed with companies like Bayer Monsanto on whether your specific role is going to be doing more harm than good. But
Absolutely.
I think I erred on the side of caution and just decided I would find something that is less likely to be twisted into
Sure.
harming another person.
Yeah, and Bayer Monsanto, they're the creators of like Roundup and
Yeah,
like chemical
glyphosate,
fertilizer,
Roundup Ready.
Roundup Ready,
Round up
right?
ready.
And that's used in a lot of agriculture farms, right? Even still today, is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they just
Okay.
lost a pretty big lawsuit over glyphosate. I don't know if that's going to mean that they start discontinuing it or not. I guess I haven't looked the last time I was at a Lowe's or a Home Depot.
And for the audience, what exactly is glyphosate?
Glyphosate is just the chemical name for Roundup. They're the same
Oh, got
thing.
it.
It's just Roundup.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Excellent. So
Yeah,
you,
I guess sorry. I guess that was a bit of a tangent. Just that to say, like, I think I try to view environmental issues through a statistical lens, but I'm not sure
Mm-hmm.
that data science itself has super colored uh, my relationship with sustainability or thinking about climate problems. Like I try to be bucket smart and not like drop smart, if you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
no.
focusing your efforts where they're going to have the largest impact.
Hmm. I don't really know that saying. What's that saying mean?
So I don't remember where I heard it, but basically it was in response to California passed. California is in and out of droughts all the time. They're probably in one right now, but California had passed a law or a bill essentially saying that restaurants should not put out tap water for their customers unless they ask for it. And the thought was that it'll reduce, wasted water.
Mm.
And then, somebody was writing sort of a more statistically minded perspective on why that idea, like, oh, we're doing something about the drought, but that is really a drop in the bucket when it comes to California's water usage, and that's very much being drop smart but bucket stupid. And I strive to be the opposite, where if it's a drop, like don't waste your time. But like if we're talking about buckets of water, then maybe we should try to focus our efforts where they're going to be most effective.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was Ty and I were doing some research earlier today, and it was called like the EV charger problem, and it was talking about how it's not about the power of the chargers. I guess TLDR was it's not about the power of the chargers, but it's about the amount of chargers that are placed and the level of convenience that's going on there. And it had its one little factoid, which was the how fast it charges in the first 20 minutes is a car is significantly faster than it does the first 20% of the battery is much faster than
80%. First 80%, I think.
it charges 80% of the battery in the first 20 minutes, like very fast, than it does the last 20 minutes it would take to charge the last 20%, something like that. I feel like there's a little bit of like a data science element going on there of if you didn't know that analysis, then everyone would just assume that it's, unless you're talking to a scientist, that it's just constant, it's the same throughout the whole thing. There isn't actually like a curve to that graph. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And it really comes down to the fact that batteries are not software products. Like they're chemical devices where
Mm-hmm.
Right.
you're drawing up and drawing down these lithium ions. So it really is like it's not like a scam that the industry is trying to pull over
Yeah.
their drivers. It's really about battery preservation, that they do have to ramp down the charging speed when batteries get to that state of charge. It can be frustrating for drivers who don't realize that is something that they should expect every time they plug in, though.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of chargers, what is the abbreviated story of how EVgo was started? Oh, by the way, Austin, before you answer that question, do you want to share that disclaimer that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think you just cut out a bit, but I think I know what you were gonna say. Is that yeah? Just before I get into too much EVgo stuff, I just want to make a quick disclaimer that yes, I work at EVgo, but obviously I won't be disclosing any material, non-public information to EVgo, the industry, its competitors, etc. All opinions that I share on the remainder of this podcast are my own and not necessarily representative of EVgo as a company, its investors, its employees, etc., etc. Um, yeah, I'm just here as Austin Zaccor, somebody who is a data scientist, happens to work in the sustainability space. That said, I will go into a bit of EVgo's very interesting story, and this is all completely available publicly, freely on Google. If you just start
Cool.
Googling everything I say, especially if you want more details, I think it is an interesting story. But
Cool.
yeah, so and at a high level, before I get into it, I think that it's a very interesting story for the reason that it serves as an amazing testament to what can and I think should happen when a corporation breaks the rules and the courts and policymakers get involved in designing financial retribution to make things right instead of just issuing what's essentially a speeding ticket that made their crime still worth it at the end of the day.
Huh. Okay.
That said, EVgo
You've caught me.
was
I want to
basically
hear.
started in 2010. Yeah, that's my hook. That's my hook to make the story sound interesting. Is that there's a moral at the end. EVgo basically started in 2010 in NRG, which if you don't know what NRG is, that at the time they were a wholesale power generation company. Nowadays they do both energy generation and retail electricity sales. But EVgo was started in 2010 as a clean energy initiative within NRG, and that was their original parent company. Then in 2012, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission settled this old, not super old, but pretty old lawsuit dating back to the like Enron versus Dynegy days that alleged that this company Dynegy had deliberately manipulated the California energy market.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was a big deal in California in the early 2000s. But basically, like after that, Dynegy sold its California subsidiary of gas plants to NRG, which included with that sale a legal obligation to spend $100 million to install 200 public fast charging EV stations throughout the state of California. So that's a huge like jumpstart for this little initiative EVgo inside of NRG. And then that gets further funding from another like big and famous scandal, the 2015 Volkswagen Dieselgate emission scandal. So more money still was eventually awarded to electric charging networks to the tune of about 5 million in California alone. But some states have yet to actually hand out their funding that was like set aside by the Dieselgate scandal.
Huh.
Dieselgate at all, I feel like people know that story fairly well.
Yeah, I guess the abbreviated version of the VW diesel scandal was that they said that they were creating vehicles, they were marketing vehicles that were environmentally friendly or like high miles per gallon. And they used diesel as the fuel, ended up being that they were actually significantly worse for the environment, even if they used diesel. Wasn't that it?
Yeah, that, and they had designed their vehicles, all their TDI vehicles, so like all turbo direct injection like diesel vehicles that Volkswagen was selling. And this is over 10 million vehicles and over 500,000 in the United States alone. They had designed them deliberately to cheat emissions testing, specifically around nitrogen oxides. So the car would know when it was being tested, and it would run very lean, like to trick emissions testing and regulators into thinking that the car was 40 tons on various nitrogen oxides, mainly nitrogen dioxide and nitrogen monoxide, which cause things like acid rain, etc. Basically cheating, making it seem like they were a lot cleaner than they were. And then they did that for like 6 years or something like that, 6 model years, and tens of million, or not tens, but 10 million cars on the road with this problem.
Wow.
They eventually got caught by the US EPA and slapped with huge fines all around the world. But part of that was basically like, because you have cheated the world on your emissions testing, we need you to set aside money for electric vehicle charging stations, essentially. Yeah, so that pretty much brings us to modern EVgo times. In 2016, NRG sold EVgo to a sustainable energy investment firm called Vision Ridge Partners. It's a Colorado-based firm. And then in December of 2019, LS Power, another company, agreed to buy EVgo from Vision Ridge. And then in early 2021, EVgo announced its plan to go public via SPAC merger. And then in July of last year, EVgo was finally listed on the NASDAQ. So that's pretty much their journey from inception to IPO. Well, I guess not technically an IPO, but to public.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And there have been a couple different charger companies, public network charger companies, including, you mentioned Electrify America, and then Tesla has a private one, right? It's not public. I've also noticed there have been a ton of charging station companies that have been started, including, is it called Artimo or Chatamo? There's SemaConnect, there's ChargePoint, and I guess leading all to the question, where's the EV charging industry now?
Yeah, good question. So, CHAdeMO you mentioned is actually a standard, is like a connection standard. There's basically two dominant plug types in the industry right now. It's CHAdeMO and CCS, which also goes by uh, SAE compliant. These are like the two main ones, and then Tesla has its own proprietary one, but you can adapt it to work on CHAdeMO. So
Okay.
it's the world is definitely moving towards hopefully just CHAdeMO is the standard, but CHAdeMO CCS are the two very popular ones. But yeah, the other companies that you mentioned, so there are a lot in the space. There's at least like 10 players with any sort of significant size. I think EVgo's network niche or market niche is that it's very much focused on public fast charging, which is similar to electrify. Also, very heavily dependent on the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal because it was spun out as a subsidiary of VW, I believe. But yeah, I think the industry is really headed. It's just maturing. So I think that we're going to see more fast chargers in public for sure. I think we're going to see more of the fast chargers being higher kilowatt hours, or kilowatts, I guess. And I think vehicles are going to continue to be manufactured with the ability to take higher kilowatt hours, or well, both kilowatt hours and kilowatts. Sorry, I keep making this distinction. Like kilowatts is like the amount of flow, right?
There's a difference. Yeah, right.
Kilowatt hours is the amount of like actual power. Like you could measure it in joules.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're saying they're trying to manufacture cars more towards having both, more being able to handle more flow and have more storage, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then in the meantime, like we're definitely going to see more home charging as well. Like that's just always going to be the cheapest option for consumers because you're just paying your own retail electricity rate, like the same that you would pay if you turn on the lights. So I think both are going to move in tandem, and both are very important for the maturation of the EV industry as a whole.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. Like Jacob kind of said at the top of the show, that we've chatted with someone in this kind of home charging space. But I think for the average consumer buying a car, because we don't fill up our cars at home, that's not a normal way that we think. People think about going to the gas station. And if I'm going to buy an electric car, going to the charging station, right? So it sounds like obviously that's the space EVgo and these other companies work in. And that seems to be the either reticence or hesitancy of people to get into this space, and is the infrastructure, right? Like I can buy a cool Tesla, but even Tesla, they're trying to like push this idea that you have these special chargers, etc. But they're kind of walling off their garden. So it seems like these other players are trying to provide um, a lot more access to the industry, or to the average consumer to buy a car, make it more realistic for them to drive down the road. Um, is that right? I mean, is that kind of the thing?
We call it range anxiety. Like, oh, like, do I really want to take my car on this road trip? Like, what if I can't find a fast like charger on the way? Will I be stranded? Like, you could always find a gas station, but can you always find a EV charging station, especially in more
Right,
rural
right.
areas? Like, the answer is no in some areas for sure, still today. But this is a problem that the Biden administration is, to their credit, is very adamant about solving as quickly as possible. Like uh, I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but they've set aside quite a lot of money to the maturation of public charging networks and trying to make it as ubiquitous as possible so that people feel confident being able to drive across the country even in an EV
Yeah.
the way you would in a gas powered vehicle.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. And yeah, I do want to dig into this idea of government funding versus private companies tackling this problem of access. But another really interesting story. We talked about this in another episode, but just recently here in Seattle, there's a tech blog called GeekWire, and they just did an article about a local entrepreneur, local startup guy that basically did a trip with his son, a couple weeks down to California, all in their EV. They had a Mustang Mach 3, I think was the vehicle.
Those
so
are
it was a
super
universal,
popular.
yeah, universal plug, but not a Tesla, right? Not a Tesla with the access to these superchargers, but and went all the way down to LA. They were checking out some baseball stadiums, I believe. The interesting thing was the gentleman mapped out his route and knew where the charging stations were and had plenty of charging in between. But one of the things that I think that was interesting that came up about the infrastructure differently than how people I think about it was the challenge he had or challenges he had when actually going to plug in and charge. He talks about, having to download, I think, 8 different apps. Sometimes the car connected, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes his payment process. So then he has to reach out. Some customers, a 2 hour stop ended up being 4 and 5, to the point where a 1.5 hour trip normally in a gas vehicle he planned a little extra, and it took him 3 days to go from Southern California back up to Seattle. So when you guys are thinking about infrastructure, there's not just the having the charging station there, but actually having the service and the support and all of that. How have you been thinking about that? What does that make you think about as you've been working in this industry a bit?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a problem. Like, it's brought up a lot. Like, I mean, it's kind of like when you're, I mean, you both live in Seattle, right? So like you've
Yeah,
seen all these like Lime scooters and stuff, but
yeah,
there's also
yeah,
like Link and there's Evo
yeah.
and there's Bird and there's
Absolutely,
like
a
four.
million.
So you have to have like all these apps if you want to be able to use all these scooters. And right now the EV charging industry is kind of in the same place where there's not a singular app where you can use you know, EVgo charging station as well as
Hmm.
competitors. I think it would be more convenient for consumers. I don't know if that's actually going to get developed. But to your other point, that things sometimes just like the connection doesn't work, like the
Hmm.
handoff doesn't go well, like something fails in the software. So I mean, I definitely think that the industry is in a period of infancy in some areas and a little bit more mature in others. And I think software is hopefully one of those ones that we're going to see some rapid improvement in the coming months. And I think years would hopefully be too conservative. I think that it's a huge problem that a lot of companies are really focusing on right now. So I'm optimistic that things will get better quickly, but I don't own an EV, so
Yeah,
I guess I won't know firsthand
that's
until somebody
interesting. You're in the
complains.
industry but don't own one yet. What is your reasoning right now?
I don't own a car.
Okay, all right. So
So
you just went the
that's the whole
full
thing.
like
Yeah.
no. Okay,
That's even
all like
better.
yeah,
It's the best. It's the
Yeah, it's the
cheapest
public
best.
way.
transportation.
I mean, I
Work
have
from
like
home.
a
Yeah, yeah,
15-year-old Acura MDX with like 200 and some odd thousand miles
right.
on it that she was gifted as a graduation present from college, and we don't really plan on getting rid of it anytime soon, just because the economics don't really make sense to sell a car, buy a
Yeah.
car, etc. We drive it so infrequently that I can't justify getting an EV right now. But I would like to own one for my next car whenever that time comes around.
So yeah, definitely believe in going all electric eventually, right? Or at some point. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people are, but we're still trying to, I feel like sometimes we're trying to fit this electric vehicle into the same paradigm as gas vehicles. And I think there's some innovation happening with I can go up and charge my car myself with an app, it's really cool technology. But I think there's this other interesting connection I keep trying to go back to. Every gas station has an attendant, right? They have a little, most of them have a store. Even if you can go up and pump your own gas, right?
Right.
There are people there, back to this kind of like the services part of the industry. Would you ever see like the EV industry going that route where there is potentially services wrapped around these charging stations?
Maybe. I mean, I do think it's inevitable, at least in states like California, Washington, Oregon, that electric vehicle charging stations will probably in the next 20 years completely replace, maybe not completely, but very largely replace gas stations. So I think it's very likely that we'll see convenience stores wrapped around EV charging stations as well.
Interesting.
That stated that they would not allow new vehicle sales after 2035 to be internal combustion engines. Like they have to be alternative fuel only, and EV is obviously the most popular right now.
Right,
So
right.
if the rest of the country follows suit, that's a very fast adoption curve. I don't think
Very
the rest of the
fast
country
adoption
will
curve.
follow suit, but I think it is a pretty strong market indicator.
So that's a really interesting idea. So blowing that out and with your data
Hmm.
science mindset, how many like where are we kind of at infrastructure wise to meet that need? How many EV chargers are needed in the US for this type of convenience? Do you estimate?
I think over 100,000 because there's
Interesting.
150,000 ish gas stations in the United States.
Okay.
And if every vehicle is replaced with an EV, granted, more like refueling, quote unquote, will be done at home, so that lessens the
Interesting.
need to some extent. But even with like a 350 kilowatt machine, that's a big piece of kit. Like there's not that many out there right now. You're going to be sitting at the station to get from 0 to 80% for at least like 15 or 20 minutes, right? So it's going to take longer than a gas pump takes to fill up your car. So that would imply that there would need to be more. So those two forces kind of working in opposite directions. I still
Yeah.
think north of 100,000. And there's
Yeah.
probably, I don't know, maybe a few thousand out there right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
and if
Yeah.
you cap like this, like if you only want to look at things that are like 50 kW or higher, even fewer than that, there's just really not that
Really?
many, right? Yeah, and I would. That's just not fast enough unless I'm going to be like, unless I'm at a hotel or something and I'm charging it overnight, or I'm at a movie theater and I'm just trying to get another, 100 miles of range or something. 50 kWs isn't super fast. Like,
Right. And that's another thing I was thinking about. I was doing a little research on this as well and thinking through that. Like, it's not just going to the charging station. We're used to going and filling up with gas, which takes minutes, right?
yeah,
Like, and if it's a big tank and you got to sit there, it's, several minutes, right? But you're still not getting into that realm typically of a half an hour,
right.
more, et cetera. And obviously with these at certain, like you said, certain kilowatts, certain flow that come in, how fast it's coming in, and the way and how big my battery is, right? And then of course back to what you said, Jacob, which is the battery fills at different rates at different points in the battery life. I mean, we could be talking in the wrong charging station a couple hours. I mean, one of the things that makes me think about is I almost want to be charging while I'm doing something else, like at a store where I'm going to go, like almost like a Costco, right? Where I'm going to spend hours anyway, go in there, charge my car. It almost feels like it's better fit in these kind of places of service where I have my habit is different, right? Like I think again back to we keep trying to fit it into the paradigm of gas stations. What else do you
Yeah,
see the
that is a
industry heading
super
towards in
good
that
point.
sense?
And I mean, what you're saying is already reflected in the early stages of like where the first EV chargers are going, right? Because when you see EV chargers, like they're not at their own independent gas station like thing, right? Like
Right,
they're in the
right.
parking lots of grocery stores and strip malls and IKEAs and Costco's and places like that. And that's where people are spending enough time to justify plugging in their car. So
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
do think that you have a very good point that we are trying to fit like a round peg in a square hole, um, with like trying to sort of just really try and replace all
Right,
existing
right.
gas stations with EV charging stations in the exact same spot, and that's going to be what it is. Maybe that will happen in some areas, certainly along like freeway corridor
Right,
networks where
right.
people aren't really stopping and staying for longer than it takes to refuel. But yeah, I think hopefully as much as is possible, we would want to fit stations where people are already going about their daily business, and it's as low interruption as absolutely possible. So I mean, you
Yeah.
want it to be a good experience for the consumer.
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I was just kind of spitballing, but I appreciate you backing me up there.
I mean,
From
you're
your
100% right.
Yeah, yeah. So from your data science role,
Mhm.
are you getting a chance to look at these types of things? Like, have if we were to ask the question, where are the most optimal spaces to put EV charges? Have you gotten a chance to model that out, look at any models like that, and think about that?
So actually, what I was hired for specifically is to work on that exact problem. So we have an algorithm that I've spent a lot of hours looking at that tries
Nice.
to estimate essentially like what um, charging would look like in various locations. I don't want to get too specific, but that's essentially what it does. And we take in information like what's around us, like is it a grocery store, etc. And it's getting more sophisticated all the time. But that is at a very high level. Like that is something that certainly EVgo is doing, and I'm sure that many of EVgo's competitors are doing similar things. But yeah, it is an algorithmic problem with an algorithmic solution,
Yeah.
as well as a boots on the ground thing, because there's a lot of nuance to creating a station that is very difficult to encode. Like you have to run conduit from wherever the nearest like distribution or utility box is to get this amount of power to an actual like charging station, right? So you have to dig up a
Yeah.
lot of concrete and a lot of asphalt and a lot of dirt
Interesting.
and run these huge copper wires underground. And I mean, it's a lot of infrastructure for sure, but
Interesting.
it's a
So
combination
they're
of
not. It's not. They can't just plug into the grid at a
exactly.
convenient
Yeah, you can't
spot.
just like plug
Interesting.
into a regular like three-prong outlet and like good to go. You need a
Right.
lot of
Right. Right.
kit to make that kind of work. Because if you
Interesting.
did, you'd be capped to like I don't even know. I'm just gonna throw out an estimate. I think you're capped to like 10 or 12 kilowatts. So
Oh.
that's pretty slow compared to like these 350s that we're seeing rolling out now.
Right.
And
And
that's
so
why
these
it works for at
companies,
home
these
charging,
companies are
right?
the ones doing this. Like these
Exactly, yeah.
companies are digging these trenches, laying
Exactly.
wire themselves. Interesting, interesting. I didn't realize it was that involved. I thought there was grid access, and they were able to just, post them up and obviously pay for that equipment. But that is a big barrier to entry there. So I am curious. Do you guys have to think about like what is it? What affects EV charging at scale? Like if I think about them, putting an EV charger in Death Valley, or the
Mhm.
Mojave Desert, or at the top of Tahoe, over the 80, in the snow. Does those things affect these chargers as we think of batteries and things like that
Yeah,
potentially?
it's a really good question. I wish I had a more definitive answer. As far as I know, temperature, humidity, precipitation, things like that don't dramatically impact the charging speed, as far as I know.
Got it.
And I
Got
mean,
it.
there are chargers. There are EVgo stations on that, Highway 50 and Highway 80 out to Lake Tahoe from Sacramento already. I don't know what
Okay.
speed they are, but I mean, certainly there some probably. I'm not
Yeah, yeah.
100% sure
Just
though.
curious as I was thinking through the infrastructure challenges you were bringing up. Um, The other interesting thing that we kind of uncovered in the research, and this may be known or not, but Tesla talks about their charging stations as being a loss leader. They're actually not making money on these. My assumption is this is their walled garden that they've created. I kind of imagine them as like the Apple of the car industry right now, where you got to
Totally.
use all their plugins and
Right.
and their toys. But I can imagine a day when they don't. What do they mean, first off, that this is a loss leader for them? And how does the rest of the industry think about this a little bit when you have players that are doing
Yeah,
it this way?
totally. Very interesting question. Yeah, so Tesla makes pretty much all of their profit off of vehicle sales. Tesla has about a low 30% profit margin on the cars that they sell, which is
Interesting.
very high for a automobile manufacturer. Like
Automobile. Yeah.
Ford's
Right.
is
Right. Right.
like, I don't know, 7%. Ford's is like 7%.
Wow.
Maybe
Wow.
maybe 12, but like it's in the single digits probably. So Tesla basically is like a wash on everything else they do.
Mm.
And this is also publicly available information. Like you could look this
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
in their
Right. Right.
filings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, so Tesla's like net profitability is really just driven off of their a bit
Right.
less. But the gap isn't like 10x or anything ridiculous like that. The gap is like, if I were gonna guess, the gap is like 30% or 20%, something like that. Like There is a price difference for sure, but it's
Yeah,
not like
yeah,
massive. It wouldn't like
right.
prohibit a Tesla driver from ever wanting to charge on a non-network charger. But they do have to bring an adapter with them if they want to charge on most non-Tesla chargers. They would have
Yeah.
to bring a Tesla to CHAdeMO like adapter that Tesla sells for however many hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. So it's a little bit inconvenient for them, but I think that I don't know how long that's going to live into the future. I think there's going to be more openness. I hope. I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of open source everything, so
Yeah.
I think that's a value creation. I hope that Tesla eventually agrees and the whole industry can get along and coalesce around a single standard. It would make a lot of things easier. It would make the app experience easier and make the charging experience easier. It would also make
So
automobile manufacturing easier because they would only ever have to worry about one standard.
yeah, I mean that's interesting because I believe the EU has basically regulated going to a standard plug, or at least providing an adapter for one, right? The
Mm.
CCS, I believe, is the one they went with.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
that's the other popular one in the US. It's CHAdeMO and CCS. Those are the two big
Yeah,
ones.
but here you still got to split between the two, and you got to have either an
Pretty much,
adapter.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, super interesting. Well, then what about the other? So you say default to open. I'm with you there. I'm Google versus I'm Android versus iOS.
Right.
But like I love that kind of idea, and that's how I think of these guys. But I've also heard because they have these margins and they've been able to go out and they're they're putting a lot of infrastructure. I mean, they have a lot of chargers out there. What if they went and turned those all to open tomorrow? How does that affect the industry?
Yeah, I think it's something they're considering. Because Tesla is seeing this Biden money come out and they want it as well, right? Like they're profit
Sure.
maximizing enterprise. Like they see money on the table. If they have a shot at getting it, they're going to take a stab at it. And I think that there is a possibility that they begin opening up their network. It would require, if they were going to do it like, quote unquote, the right way, and so that, everybody could really charge at their stations, it would require quite a bit of infrastructure tweaking. Um,
So it's not just as easy as opening them up and saying, okay,
it's
you
not
guys
really
can
as
use
easy
it.
as flipping a switch, right? Because
Yeah.
not every car can use that standard.
Yeah.
Or everybody
Got it.
has to bring around, like one of these freaking headphone dongles wherever they go,
Right,
but
right.
much more
Yeah.
expensive and larger bit of kit in their car to work with every
Yeah.
other standard that exists. I'm hoping
Fair.
that that's like a vestigial organ of the
Yeah.
nascency of the industry. I think it'll be a funny thing to reflect back on in even like 20 years to be like, oh, remember when there were all these different plugs?
There's
Now,
just
of course,
yeah.
there's just standard
So
plug.
why do you think they're doing it in the first place? If they call it a loss leader, why are they? Is this just a value add for their customer? Like, what are they trying to do there?
Because their customers have range anxiety as well. So if they're selling, I mean, they're selling a vehicle, but they're also selling, what is still a fairly novel approach
Sure.
to transportation. And Tesla, to their credit, was really the pioneer on the EV industry, right? Like most of the cars in most EVs in the United States are still Teslas, despite how many other entrants into the market there are. So they had to create a network to even have a shot at selling these cars, because otherwise, like, look at the
Interesting.
Toyota Mirai. That's an amazing vehicle, but it runs on hydrogen. How many hydrogen filling
Right.
stations are there
Right.
in the United States?
2.
Yeah, exactly. And they're both in California. So if you don't live in LA or San Francisco, like, you're never gonna drive this car.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Got it. Super interesting.
So, Austin, another interesting fact that most probably don't know about EV industry, EV chargers, is that there's a little bit of this question of how much infrastructure do we build ahead of the actual demand for the cars. This was 2020 numbers, but it said only 2% of vehicle purchases in 2020 were of EV vehicles. And so I think there's just a little bit of like this risk assessment that these companies are constantly going through. You guys, or EVgo, has really 3 different customers. At least that's what I found. It was businesses, kind of like a B2B play. 2 was fleets and automakers, which you could say is 2 different categories in itself. And then number 3 was drivers, right? Being able to charge their car and pay for it. What have you learned about the consumer's appetite to spend money on this, or at least what have you seen?
I think it's becoming more and more just, we've probably already seen the sort of wave of like early adopters. Like, I'm interested in the tech, or I'm really passionate about driving
Hmm.
a zero, at least point source, emission vehicle.
Hmm.
Um, because obviously electricity is still, in the United States, largely generated by burning natural gas or
Yeah,
coal,
Right.
even in some places. Luckily,
right.
Washington State, very clean grid because everything is
It's
hydro.
true. Yeah.
Hydro, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think now we're sort of transitioning into the area make the decision that's best for them. And given that there are still federal tax subsidies for buying an EV, and
Mm.
EVs are coming out cheaper and more plentiful every year, I think more and more people are deciding that they don't want to spend, $7 a gallon on gas in LA when they could charge at home. And they just want
Yeah.
to go, like 60 miles to and fro. They don't even care about the range that much because they're just buying a commuter car. So I think it is sort of transitioning into that stage where it's just like now people are making the decision because it makes sense for them. It's no longer divided along like, some sort of like, technocrat elite really likes having the newest
Yeah.
thing. Like, my very conservative uncle owns a Tesla, and it's not for the money reason, but it's for the performance
Nice.
reason. Like, he likes having a car that has full torque at 0
Yeah.
RPM. And there are consumers that are like that as well. Like, there's I think there's a little bit of something for everybody, except
Yeah.
people who are going to miss that, internal combustion noise. Like, I had a V8 Mustang when I was in high school, and I loved that car.
You had a
EVs
Mustang,
don't sound like that.
Exactly.
but it still can appeal to the car enthusiasts. They do go so fast,
They go so
so
fast.
quick.
I mean, all the fastest cars in the world now, if they're not pure EV, they're at least hybrids because like
Interesting.
they want that like extreme torque at
Yeah.
zero an hour
Yeah.
over
Sure.
time and over speed. And EVs don't have that problem. They have full go right from the start of
Instantly.
the line. Yeah.
Nice.
So it sounds like the consumer appetite has high potential. So how do you think of getting out of this early adopter phase? Ty brought that up with there's
Yeah.
sometimes these technical uh, errors that happen, and someone has to like maybe go to a different charger. Like there's some patience that comes with that. That's definitely an early adopter persona sort of a thing. How is this going to get out of that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I honestly think we're just about to see it like just happen organically. Because like you said, right now, like 1% ish of cars on the road are 1.9. And then for newly sold cars, it's a bit higher than that still. So in some markets in California, we're seeing I think by one report, like 5% of the newly sold vehicles in 2022 in California were EVs. So that like 5% margin.
Yeah.
I was reading an article the other day about how that's considered like a huge turning point for any
Hmm.
industry. When you get 5% of the market adopting that thing, then you're ready for the steep part of the curve. Like 5% of
Interesting.
people using an Apple iPhone, 50%
Uh,
was not far away from that on a time
Interesting.
horizon.
Hmm.
Hockey sticks from there, huh? Nice.
Exactly.
Nice.
And I mean, California and Washington bills about like
Sure.
banning internal combustion engine sales after 2035. 2035 is really not that
Yeah.
far away. That's less than
Yeah.
13 years, or sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, 13 years. Wow. Okay. Future's coming fast.
Here we go.
But I mean, even by nonpartisan estimates, like say you don't want to trust the Biden administration, that's fine. By a meta analysis of various like news outlets and industry experts, approximately 50% of new vehicle sales are probably going to be EVs by the end of the decade.
Damn.
And
Wow.
that's nationwide, not just
Wow.
California, Washington, Oregon, or anything like that. Like, that's
Wow.
nationwide. So that's quite a lot of
Big.
growth for the industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. My best answer is I think it's happening. I think we're seeing it now.
Yeah, we're about to go into
Nice.
that early majority phase. That's pretty cool. How does an EV charging company balance making money and being good for the planet? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm not sure what other companies are doing in that space, but I know EVgo only sells net like carbon neutral electricity. So if they were to purchase like a kilowatt hour of electricity in
Hmm.
like Mobile, Alabama, and sell it to, a car who plugs in Mobile, Alabama. I don't know what the grid is like there, but I would assume like it's still quite a bit of coal.
Yeah.
EVgo would have to pay for enough like essentially carbon offsets to make that kilowatt hour carbon neutral, as if it had been originated from a wind farm or a solar farm or something like that. It's much cheaper for us to do that in Washington State, where everything's hydro, but you know, in the rest of the country, we do quite a bit of purchasing of low carbon fuel standard credits and just carbon offsets in general. And that is also partially for a profitability reason. Like, we are able to sell those. We get like public funding money for those credits, and it is pretty substantial. Like, it's not, the majority of our revenue or anything like that, but it's definitely a chunk of change. And I'm sure other companies are looking at the same, that they're probably cashing in on, maybe not to the same extent that EVgo is doing it, but I think they're also cashing in on tax subsidies for carbon offsets. Like, if we move to a world where, let's say, like, the government just says, like, okay, all pollution is going to be capped at this exact amount, and then people are just going to have to trade credits to be able to have the right to pollute, then these credits become even more and more valuable, and it becomes even more and more profitable to sell a lot of electric energy versus a gallon of gasoline.
Interesting.
So I think, I mean, I don't know, like, I'm a pessimist, so I think that no company with investors, certainly no corporation, is ever going to make a decision solely for the purpose of, like, it was the right decision for the planet, or it was the right decision for future generations. Like, they have investors, they are legally obligated to act in the best interest of their investors.
Absolutely.
So I think this is about as much as we can expect from the industry. But I mean, at least in EVgo's way, they are appealing to people's appetite for having a truly, like, zero to low carbon fuel source for their vehicle. I think that's great. Like, whether they're making money off of it or not, I think that's the direction that probably will take more of the United States towards a path of sustainability, rather than relying on people's good graces to do it, because I mean, people are horrible.
Hey, I mean, that's true. That's also the thesis of the show. Ty and I's belief is that for-profit companies have to get involved in this. We have to, if we're going to get to even marginally a good place, this is a must. Ty, were you going to say something?
Just that. I mean, I think it's really awesome that you brought this up, because we're exploring this in a lot of different ways. And I think you bring up some really interesting points. But that is the reason why we are actually interviewing people who work with for-profit companies. I mean, although I would argue there's still some government subsidies behind a lot of this,
totally.
right? I mean, Tesla is propped up, but arguably other industries, oil and gas, as one of them, have been propped up for a long, long time. So this is not abnormal. But it is an interesting angle. And I like what you bring up about, like, maybe it's because people aren't so great and we want to make money. And that is an argument of capitalism and competition in this way, that this is where innovation comes from. This is where wealth is generated. This is where, new ideas really try to take shape. But is that true? Is that the actual case? This one is actually about doing good. And our grid is not perfect. Like you said, there's coal, so you need carbon offsets. Does that mean there's companies out there providing electricity, not maybe buying carbon offsets, and just kind of, taking advantage of a really crappy power grid system already? Or is it, this is the only way? By having companies that make money in this, they'll come up with ways to do it better, cleaner for our future. I know, big question, but that kind of, like Jacob, I don't know if you have any other comments or thoughts there.
Jacob or me? Sorry.
You, sorry.
Yeah.
Austin,
I mean, I think you are asking the exact right question. And your point that you brought up at the beginning of that, about how, like, I mean, it's not as if Chevron and Royal Dutch
Right.
Shell and BP haven't benefited from huge government spending. We started literal
Right.
wars for them.
Every day. Yeah.
We're not starting wars for EVgo and
No.
Buy
No.
America, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I mean, the United States military is like 40 some odd percent of our discretionary spending. So taxpayers are definitely propping up traditional, internal combustion engines as well.
100%.
I think transportation is always something that's probably going to be at least a little bit taxpayer subsidized. Maybe, I mean, I would expect to see that ramps down over time for EVs specifically. Like once they're on their own 2 feet, then it's just like self-sustaining profitability, because a lot of the infrastructure is already built, and now you're just like doing maintenance. You're only replacing them when they wear out, or updating them where they need to be updated. And hopefully electricity is relatively stable. Who knows what the future holds? But to your question about like, is it really only going to be profit driven versus like, is there any sort of room for people to just do the right thing? Is that more or less the size of the
That's a great
question?
part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. Like my wife, and because we think it's the right thing to do, right? Like because we don't want to contribute that to climate change. And and originally it started as a climate change thing. Like once I had the blinders down, I was able to see that I also cared about like factory farm animal rights and all that jazz. But it originally started as a climate change thing. Like it's so intense, like agriculturally energy intensive to create a pound of meat versus like a pound of chickpeas or something. And we do that not for ourselves, right? Because we both love the taste of meat, and we love cooking, we love seafood, and both of us love dairy, eggs, except the whole shebang. But we do it because we think it's the right. I think maybe it is a bit unfair of me to paint in such broad strokes and say that things are only going to happen when it's profitable to do so, and everybody's just this like what economists call an econ versus a human. Like everybody's just like a perfectly profit optimizing, like utility optimizing automaton.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely a mix, right?
I love it. Yeah.
It's definitely a mix. Hopefully we see more and more people, hopefully younger generations are more environmentally minded than older generations, and things get better slowly. To whether or not it'll be fast enough, I'm such a climate change like pessimist. I think the world is headed for no good. Regardless of
That's
what
from
we
a
do.
data scientist. He's looking at the data, guys.
Nah, it's just from a pessimist.
All right, fair enough. Well, again, arguably, we just created the richest man in the world with a whole lot of government subsidies,
Right.
and government propped up. Maybe one last piece of this question, then, we've talked a little bit about how the EU has standardized on a plug. We've talked about, Biden just put in, a whole bunch of money for infrastructure with carve out specifically aimed at electric vehicles, electric charging, etc. We have car buying subsidies in this space already. Whether it's them getting out of the game or them getting into the game in a different way, what do you feel like needs to happen next for the government to open this up and let more competition and more innovators in, or help it more, and go faster to get to this next place? What does the government need to change? What's the next regulatory shift we need?
I think this is something that not a lot of people would think about, but I think one huge barrier that would make it a lot easier for fast charging networks to proliferate and see like organic profitability is if there was some sort of top-down push for more standard or more favorable like surge pricing at the utility level. Whether that's only for EV charging stations or only for like, green power, whatever you want to call it, or if it's just across the board, I'm not sure. But there are some utilities where it's just so cost prohibitive to have a fast charging network, because as soon as you plug in a 350 pulling like Tesla Model S or whatever, even for 15 minutes, you now have a factor on your pricing sheet for that entire month that will make it so grossly unprofitable to have operated that station, even
Wow.
if you were only pulling that amount of power for like 15 minutes. So not all utilities are that bad, obviously, or else there would be no electric vehicle charging station networks.
Yeah.
But it is a problem that I don't know how anybody would be aware of it unless they were already like in the industry to some
In the
extent.
industry.
That this surge pricing is so dramatic in some cases.
So this is utilities actually
It's
already
utilities,
implemented. They already have surge pricing implemented.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it makes it cost prohibitive to even touch that grid, touch that system
At least for
with
that
a
much
charger.
power, right? Because it makes
Interesting.
sense from their perspective, right? Like if I'm PG&E, or it makes more sense on a smaller scale than that. If I'm a local like co-op utility,
Right,
and I
right.
have a huge business that has very like sporadic power demands, it's very expensive for me to be able to respond very quickly to their dramatic changes in power usage. Like if they turn on some massive machine and then just turn it off 5 minutes later, that's a lot of like physical changes I have to
Yeah.
make at the utility to generate that power to meet that, because the grid
Got
has
it.
to
Got
be
it.
meeting power exactly to the kilowatt at all times.
Interesting.
And the way that
Yeah,
that
yeah.
works nowadays in like at least in natural gasification plants and nuclear and anything that has a turbine is that you have literal tons of spinning steel blades, and that amount
Wow.
of kinetic energy is essentially what keeps a grid stable. And if I were to like plug in some massive machine, or to a much smaller extent a Tesla, and pull 350 kW or like megawatt hours or megawatts
Mm.
off this thing, it's going to stop a lot of that momentum. And I have to immediately turn around and burn more fuel or do whatever I need to do to get those blades spinning fast enough, or I'll crash the entire grid. So
Wow.
there is a why they do it
Yeah,
this way.
yeah, yeah.
But if there was some sort of standardization to the
Got it. Got
pricing,
it.
maybe it's EV specific or not, that would be hugely helpful, I think, to all networks,
Or,
Tesla,
or even
non-Tesla,
maybe
all of
just
them.
a max, right? Like a
Yeah, or a
limit
max, a
at the
cap.
top where like they couldn't, maybe they even it out somewhere else in
Yeah,
their
or a better way to
surging.
amortize it. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But they can't go over a certain amount, allows companies to be able to come in and do that. That's super interesting. Great perspective. I had not even heard of this, and super informative on how our grids have to kind of maintain stability. Hey Jacob, I think it's
I think we're
time,
gonna
man.
take it home. Yeah. So Austin, we're gonna do something before we end this chat, which is called Rapid Mayhem Questions. So we're gonna ask you some challenging EV
Sweet.
charger,
I'm
EV
ready.
vehicle industry, and yeah, answer the best you can, and hopefully we can all learn something along the way. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. True or false? About 60% of consumers avoid EVs because they worry about running out of a charge, but
I would think that's true.
only a quarter of drivers actually have gone to zero.
Hmm. I would also think that's true.
You think that is true?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's actually the numbers are slightly different. From AAA did this study. About 57% of consumers avoid EVs because they worry about running out of a charge. Only 5% of owners have run out.
Wow.
Only
Okay. Well,
5%.
I guess it was it would be pretty
Kind of a trick
bad.
question. That's kind of a trick question, Jacob. I
No,
don't know.
no, that's fair. That's
We
fair.
asked
I should
someone
be
else. I like it. I like it.
All
more
right,
suspicious. Keep
I like
going.
it.
number
I'm
2.
liking it.
These are all gonna be true or false. By true or false, CO2 emissions per gallon of gas is 39 pounds.
Whoa. How much does a gallon of gas weigh? About 60, right?
Hmm.
Less, way less. Hmm.
True or false?
I don't know. I
That
don't know.
sounds high. I'm gonna go false. I don't know, but I'm gonna
That's
go
right.
false.
You're right. It's actually
Okay.
25 pounds.
Well, that's still a lot though.
That's still a
That's a
lot.
lot. That's a
Yep.
lot.
And this is from Drawdown, the book that did the biggest
Oh
study on the
yeah.
100 solutions to draw down on our carbon and greenhouse emissions. All right,
Oh
number
yeah.
3. Number 3, true or false? There are over 1 billion cars on Earth, with a third of oil consumption used to fuel gas-powered cars.
I think that's true. I thought it was significantly more than a billion.
It's actually more. It's 2/3 of the world's oil consumption is used to fuel cars. That was
Wow.
this is 2017 works cited, so it might
And
be.
how many cars are there actually? Is it over,
It's over a billion now.
but they don't say exactly how many?
This was also from Drawdown, so
Okay, for sure.
I haven't seen updated. All right, number 4. Hybrid cars produce 90% fewer pollutants than a non-hybrid one.
CO2 is different than, nitrogen oxides, etc. I'll go with 90% fewer. I mean, it's not like they're 90% more fuel efficient. So I guess I'll go false because they can't be producing 90% fewer CO2.
It's a little borderline. So here it says that it can produce 90% fewer pollutants than a hybrid car. And then it says the environmental impact of electrical cars and hybrids is quite significant. In addition, a hybrid vehicle can save you 15 to 20% on fuel costs. So I guess that's true.
Wait, say the question again. Sorry, I know we already.
Yeah. So hybrid cars can produce 90% fewer pollutants than a non-hybrid one.
Okay, interesting. I would
Me
not have
neither.
guessed
Me
true,
neither.
but
I definitely would
that's
not have.
good to know.
Yeah.
I can link in the show notes. All right, last question. True or false? Pure electric cars, pure, don't need oil changes, transmission, or coolants, but they do need brake fluid replacement. True or false?
Well, they definitely need brake fluid replacement. I hmm. I mean, they don't need engine oil, right? Because they don't have an engine. But do they need transmission fluid? That was part of the first section, right?
Yeah, that's included.
I feel like I've heard of some EVs having two gears, which would imply that there's some sort of transmission going on. So I guess it's false on that.
Yes, you're right. It is false.
Okay.
The fact is that they don't need oil changes, transmission fluid, or brake fluid replacements.
They don't need brake fluid replacement? How is that possible?
This does depend on your category of EV. I know there's 3 different categories. So if we were talking about a hybrid, then it does, no doubt. I mean I have a hybrid.
Yeah, but a true EV doesn't need brake fluid replacements? That's crazy.
Yeah, I'll link in the show notes. Well,
Wow, okay. The more you know.
Rapid Mayhem questions deactivated. How was that? How you feeling? You feeling okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, Austin. Lastly, we like to end on some sort of call to action. Climate change it's huge. It feels so big. Some people call it a hyper object, right? People often feel helpless in being able to help. What do you think is the equivalent of what a listener can do? And maybe it's frame it in a fun way. Any busy soccer mom can do.
Yeah, I mean, personal action that is completely unrelated to the EV industry. I think you avoid a huge amount of your carbon footprint if you just cut down on the number of meals you eat per week with meat in them.
Okay.
So if you're going to do like meatless Mondays, if that's your starting point, that's totally cool. Go with that. But if you can do like only eat meat on the weekends or whatever, or only eat meat when you go out to restaurants because you don't want to give up that experience, maybe try just moving in that direction because the impact is quite large.
Can you quantify that impact? Do you know of any facts to help people believe that more?
Ooh, man, I don't want to say something that's factually incorrect. So
Sure.
Sorry to leave another call to action to the viewer, but you should really Google it because I think you'll be surprised. I think agriculture is the 3rd largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the United States after transportation and energy production. I may be wrong about that, but it's certainly up there. And meat obviously has by far the highest CO2 footprint per pound of food or per calorie if you want to break it down that way.
Yeah, that's true. I can actually get that stat for us by the end of this episode about what percentage the total pie makes up our agriculture and what we eat. Well, Austin, any other calls to action for the audience before we go?
One that I have a hard time with because I love travel. Jet fuel takes up a lot of CO2. There's a lot of CO2. There's big carbon footprint when you fly. So if you can't avoid flying or like take more condensed vacations, and this is not a perfect solution. You could have more. You could fill a whole season just talking about carbon offset markets and how fraught with various issues they are. But it's better than not doing it. So if you can't reduce your flying, it's not as expensive as you might think.
It's the average consumer, them flying, if they did one across the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, it accounts for some like 50% of their annual emissions. So
yeah, it's huge.
It's pretty big.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then finally, this is under from the book How to Avoid a Climate Crisis, the Bill Gates book that he wrote. It said 19% of emissions come from how we grow things. So just like in the whole category of food and agriculture, it's about a fifth. Yeah. And then how we get around was 16%. So a little bit under a fifth, say like a sixth. Right. And then there's some other really big ones, like how we make things. Really, that has the biggest chunk. That's 31%.
Fascinating. Okay, so it's manufacturing.
Yeah, and how we plug in is the second biggest. That's electricity. You mentioned it's
Right.
Fueled by carbon or by coal, or just fossil fuels in general. So yeah, interesting stuff. And then Austin, what EVgo? So is there an app, website? Any good
Yeah,
blog articles?
I think our website is pretty good, or EVgo's website. If you just go to evgo.com, then you will be you will be provided with
Laden with information.
useful information. But for most people, if they're actually going to use the network, they're probably just going to interact through mobile apps. So if you just go on your phone, Android or Apple store, you can just type in EVgo. It'll probably be the first thing that comes up.
Okay, great. And
Great.
if you have a hybrid car,
Mhm.
you use EVgo.
So it's a plug-in hybrid?
Let's pretend it's a plug-in hybrid.
Wow. I actually don't know the answer to that question, because I think of hybrid or plug-in hybrids as the kind of people who would never charge on a public network because they
They might
will
not need
just
to.
use their gas
Right.
engine. Yeah, they'll only plug in at home where it's it's just dirt cheap.
Yeah.
So maybe, but they're a very large
Fair,
percentage
fair,
of our
fair.
customers.
All right, Austin. This
Yeah,
was amazing.
a ton of fun.
Really,
Thank you so much for
really
having me on,
appreciate it.
both of you.
Yeah. But I think we learned a ton. And yeah, I love the way you bring a data science mindset to it, but also not. And you brought your own views, and we really appreciate that. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great night.
You too,
You
man.
do the same.
Take
Bye.
care,
Take
dude.
care.
Bye-bye.
Boom. How was that? Well, there's more. So keep listening. We speak with climate tech leaders and change makers in EV, reforestation, solar energy, flood mapping, and a whole lot more. Also, you can give feedback or check out show notes at our website, climatemayhem.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Oh, don't forget, if you found this valuable or interesting at all, please hit subscribe. That way we know you're loving it. So just go to Spotify or whatever podcast app you're on, hit that subscribe button at the top. Production was done by Daniel Steenkamp with cover art by Harrison Glenn. This is Jacob Kubica with my legendary colleague, Ty Wolf motherfucking Jones. Peace out, Climate Mayhem. Out.